Good morning. Good morning. About 10 years ago, I decided I needed to plant a garden. Now, bear in mind, I knew nothing about gardening, and I certainly wasn't a gardener. You see, I'd been living in a place called St. Cloud, Minnesota, a community where I could find none. I had moved there for a job several years earlier as a faculty member at St. Cloud State University. And while my job was there, my life, my community was elsewhere. My partner lived in another city, my friends, my connections were everywhere else. And so I spent the first several years there leaving. And on one of the many occasions where I was leaving, I found myself in Detroit attending a conference, and there I met a woman who would eventually change my life, becoming my mentor. Her name is Grace Lee Boggs. 2 weeks from today is her 100th birthday, so wish her a very happy birthday. Grace founded an organization called Detroit Summer, a multi-generational, interracial collective intended to rebuild and respirit Detroit from the ground up through youth leadership and collective action to develop community-based solutions to Detroit's problems. Grace called on me to come back to Detroit, bring some students, and find out what they were doing. And so I did. For the next 5 years, I brought students to Detroit. We worked on murals, housing rehabilitation, planted community gardens, planned community suppers, and it was incredible to see what they were accomplishing as a community of folks came together. But in 2004, I was still miserable in St. Cloud. I had had enough, and I said to Grace, I need to leave. And she looked at me. She wasn't going to have any of that. She looked at me and she said, why are you always leaving? You need to stay in one place in order to name its problems with authority. What are you doing to change things? What are you doing to grow community? And I realized at that moment that I had been missing the point. See, the purpose of Detroit Summer wasn't just to change Detroit, but it was to change the people in it so that they brought the lessons home to their own communities and made change there. And while I was encouraging my friends and my students to do that, asking my students constantly, so what are you doing to change your community? I wasn't asking those questions of myself. And so I realized I needed to cultivate community. For if after all, I as a white girl felt out of place in St. Cloud, surely others did as well. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that St. Cloud was filled with unfriendly people, it's just that they already seemed to have their own communities and they were full up. So I decided to plant a garden. I had seen what gardens could do in Detroit, transforming an ugly vacant lot and thereby the community as people came together to plant, tend, and harvest. I wondered, could I cultivate community where I lived by starting a garden? Would it help me feel connected to the lives of others around me? I realized as a university faculty member I had a lot of resources, and I thought I should put them to use for this purpose. So I returned from Detroit with Grace's charge to me fresh in my mind. What was I doing to build community? And at the first occasion, I approached a university administrator, I think at a reception convocation week, and I said, can I start a community garden? And he said, yes. And I said, will you give us some money? And he said, yes. And I said, will you pay for the water? And he said, yes. And I said, will you put all of that in writing and agree not to build on or near the space for the next 5 years? And he said, yes. So with that support behind me and being a good academic, I went to a conference. And there I participated in a municipal gardening workshop, and I was told if I wanted a successful community garden, I must build a fence, charge fees, and have lots of rules. And I thought, well, that makes no sense. I want to cultivate community. How on earth do you cultivate community when you immediately put up barriers? So I decided our garden was not going to have any of these things. My experiences as a community organizer kind of kicked in. I started planning meetings in the community and on campus. I wanted to know what others wanted out of this garden, and I thought, nobody's going to show up. And I told this to Grace, and she said, don't worry, you just keep showing up. Others eventually will as well, and your reliability, consistency, and constantly showing up will become appreciated by others. And people did show up. Together we planned this beautiful garden. We had a mission, we had a vision, we had goals, and we were excited about the first day of planting. And that finally arrived. I arrived early at the garden. The plants, plans, all of that together. One of the gardeners was already there. I was excited to get started, and I thought, he's ready to work. And he was poking up the soil, and he looked at me, and he shook his head, and he said, Tracy, this will never work. You see, the land that we had been given by the university, once the site of 2 houses, had sat vacant for 13 years. And in Minnesota, we get a lot of snow and it doesn't melt, so we have to put it someplace, and they dumped it on this site for 13 years. As a result, we had salty, compacted soil, not a pollinator to be found, no worms. It was devoid of life. It took 2 people to run the rototiller as it kind of skipped across the top of the soil. And so between these poor soil conditions, all the naysayers, and our crazy idea of no fences and no fees and no rules, the garden was declared a disaster before it even started. And yet I believed it would work. See, I'd spent most of my life around people who believed in the impossible. People like my mother, who could literally make something from nothing, continuing on with her life despite evidence to the contrary. That's Mom. She doesn't smoke anymore. My mother, I remember one morning, it was a bitter winter morning, my 3 brothers and I were in the kitchen wondering what was for breakfast. The water wasn't running. That's because either we couldn't pay the bill or the pipes were frozen. It was one of those 2 things. There was no milk or eggs in the fridge, but there was a fresh snowfall. And my mother told us of the wonders of snow pancakes. And with nothing more than flour and sugar and some fresh snow, she made the most fantastic pancakes I ever recall eating. And so if my mother could literally make something from nothing, surely we could make this garden into something. And we did. The going was tough at first. As we went to plant the young raspberries in this hard, rock-hard soil, I read the instructions and it said, amend the soil with compost. I had no idea what that meant. I wasn't a gardener. But one of the gardeners said, don't worry, I've got some compost. He ran home. He had plenty to get our raspberries started, as well as our young plum trees. And overall, it was a good day in the garden. It's amazing what happens when you show faith in people. The care and generosity that they will share with you is astounding. And over the next several years, we kept showing up. I kept showing up. We needed mulch to take care of our plants, to keep the water in and the weeds out. Ben shows up with a connection to a farmer that has a lot of large straw bales to get to us. We needed something built. Chris showed up with his power tools and got to work. We needed a space for the children to play. Colin shows up with a boat. He's a set builder at a local children's theater. We kept tripping over the hoses, and they kept kind of being dragged on the tender plants as we manually watered everything. Kevin showed up with materials to build some hose guides. The garden was too muddy to work in one day. Children showed up anyway to play in it. We call this the Abbey Road shot. Anne and Christopher donated some hog fencing to us, but we had no way to get it to the garden. Dan showed up with his truck, and we got it delivered. We needed to get things ready to make the garden look beautiful for an upcoming tour. Larry showed up to beautify things as well as himself. And we needed a solution to our unsustainable manual irrigation system because, frankly, I was tired of hauling hoses everywhere. Some students showed up with a design for a sustainable drip irrigation system. Over the years, the garden has become a very special place. But just as tending that soil took time, growing that community in the garden also took time, patience, and care. But it was worth it, whether it was hearing stories of Christy, who heard the voice of her grandmother as she worked the soil, or watching Meta enjoy a moment with her son Carl, or watching the little children learn how things grow, or watching little Kylie see if she can make her little sister grow faster. Whatever it was, that garden was becoming a very special place, and we needed to establish a sense of trust with each other, working together to create our own guidelines of how we'd work together. Often we created guidelines in contrast to those of the outside world. For example, if you want to be involved in the garden, all you have to do is show up. You're in. An hour's worth of work a week entitles you to your share of vegetables. Miss a week? No worries. We don't cultivate guilt in our garden. Wouldn't it be nice if that was the case everywhere? Over the years, we've created this healthy plot of land, and we've also created this healthy and vibrant community. It's become a place of sharing, of support, of laughter, of healing, and so many other things. We celebrate good times, and we support each other in challenging times. And rather than this becoming a place of destruction and vandalism, as everybody predicted, because remember we have no fences, instead things are brought to the garden, as this gazing ball in this next slide shows you, suddenly shows up. One of the greatest gifts that we had was in the fall of 2013. We were honored with a visit of a delegation of Mapuche to get a special blessing in the garden from the Machi. And it was a horrible day. It was raining, it was cold, it was windy. The delegation arrives, it's still raining. The Machi's ready to give her blessing, and it's still raining. And we thought, we're going to have to cancel. And suddenly, as she began her blessing, the clouds parted, the sun came out, and we were led in this amazing celebration and ceremony of the garden and its community. And as she gave that final blessing, the rains came down again, as if to affirm that the garden was this blessed space. I've been so fortunate to have this adventure that is the garden. It's enabled me to uncover the strong communities in St. Cloud, and I've been amazed at the ways in which I've been welcomed into them. I started this as a journey to search for community, and I've been astounded at the number of communities that I now am a member of. Over the years, we're now in our 11th season, the garden has continued to grow. We've doubled in size. We can no longer plant it in a day. It takes several days. We've had hundreds of visitors and learned many life lessons. And last year, we were voted the best community garden in the state of Minnesota. We've had visitors from around the world, and we are enriched by each interaction that takes place there. I have no idea where the future of the garden will take me, but I do know that the roots that we have grown are strong and sustainable, and I look forward to continuing to enjoy the fruits of our labor. Thank you.